So at Box, we sell to enterprises. So our whole business model is we power how large organizations share and collaborate and get their work done. And I spend a significant amount of my time outside of Silicon Valley. And what anybody who has spent time outside of Silicon Valley in the past couple of years would notice, and what certainly this conference is all about, is you have a large chunk of the Fortune 500 which is going through a pretty significant and tectonic shift in their business models, in the industries that they're going after, in how they run their organizations, in what kind of talent they need, and who they should invest in. That whole world is very different. And a lot of it sort of resembles the underlying idea of the innovator's dilemma. But the innovator's dilemma is about sort of how managers tend to respond poorly to low-end disruption of their business. But it assumes that they have sort of the talent and the people and the capabilities to respond. It's just, what is the dilemma of going and serving customers in a very different way?
The incentives are off.
All of the incentives are off because the customers look less profitable. You don't quite understand that it's actually the market that you're supposed to be serving initially, and then the innovators actually become bigger, and then they disrupt you. And so what we want to do is kind of apply innovator's dilemma to industrial businesses that don't necessarily have all the right talent. They don't necessarily have the right subsidiaries to launch into this. And importantly, the incentives are very different. So, so we decided to put up together a course to talk to people like Beth and Mark Fields and others about how are you responding to disruption.
And so why did you invite Beth?
Because GE is probably, I would say, like the quintessential example of a company that is responding successfully to this disruption, both in their business model, in their talent, in their investments, in their acquisitions, their brand, and I actually think that maybe 5% of the Fortune 500 has done something kind of interesting and compelling in this area, and GE is at the top of that list.
But Beth, this is really hard stuff, right? I mean, you think about some of the phrases that get tossed around Silicon Valley. My favorite, you may have called this to my attention. People talk about, putting out a minimally viable product and then improving it along the way. It doesn't work for jet engines.
You hope not.
Yeah. So how do you take a 124-year-old company and make it act like a startup, which has been what you've been tasked with doing?
Yeah, well, we're trying to do a couple things at once. One is to be digital and industrial. So it's a lot of things at the intersection, to be big but act small. So you're asking people to do a lot of things that seem like paradoxes. And one leads to the other. For a digital industrial company, the industrial internet is something we've been going after aggressively for the past 5+ years. And it was just this awareness that, hey, you can start to embed sensors and controls in every piece of equipment and every technology we build, and a lot of amazing insights and outcomes can get delivered, and we can help our customers run their business better. Where do we start? We know hardware, we don't know software. And so you have to start to create that mashup of talent, of skills, of capability, and you start to learn we have to act, agile, all these kind of things we talk about. You have to actually make them cultural, not just something you talk about.
And culture is hard.
Culture is really hard.
Which is harder, Aaron? Is it harder for a digital company to learn the physics that GE knows, or is it hard for a big industrial company like GE to learn digital?
So GE is in a unique spot because they literally build jet engines, and so there are many sort of complex things about that. However, there are a lot of industries where the things that the industrial or companies have gotten good at in the physical world are now actually easy to rent or build on demand. You can now, like you have startups going after the car industry, so you can do car manufacturing even. Certainly you can do any kind of hardware manufacturing. You saw Nest got started purely with some designers and a software team and people that knew industrial design. So it's probably at this stage easier to get some of the manufacturing process than it is to figure out a digital ecosystem to be able to put together an incredible software experience. That is not true of the scale that GE operates at. And so the challenge is, and the classic thing is, can Detroit get good at software faster than Silicon Valley can get good at car companies?
And I actually think the challenge is slightly different in that I think we have to get good at that intersection, all of us. So digital first companies, if you're a Google, an Amazon, or whatever, hardware is really hard, right? You're seeing that. I think maybe Tesla is one of the rare exceptions where they're figuring out hardware and software at the same time. For a physical first company, software and digital are hard, but you come at it with some strength. And so how do we figure out what's necessary at that intersection? We're all figuring that out. So we each come to it, I think for us, appreciating the physical science, material science, knowledge of physical principles is a real competitive advantage in this space.
You guys are trying to, with Predix, which is part of
right.
GE Digital, you were trying to create the platform for the industrial internet. If you succeed, if you become the Microsoft for that's huge. That's a huge business. But I mean, will they succeed, or will that be a Silicon Valley software company that creates the platform for the industrial internet?
I think that this is so. This is where GE again stands in a very unique position relative to a lot of other companies, and why. What year did you guys start this whole effort? 6-7 years ago?
Yeah, at least 5 or 6.
And this is the kind of
very good marketing for you, by the way, Beth.
Yeah. We're a good customer.
There's a massive compounding advantage to companies that start in these spaces initially. Earlier than their competition. And so in the case of industrial internet and industrial sort of digital experiences, it's quite reasonable that GE now has the best position because they started well before anybody else in the space. I would also say this is not an area where it's going to be a single company dominating the platform. Yeah. So you are going to see this mix and sort of this mix and matching of different types of technologies, different platforms.
Interoperability in a way maybe we haven't seen.
And a lot of unique partnerships
right.
that are very strange. I mean, we have a unique relationship because GE was our largest customer when we were relatively small, and that's very, very hard for a Fortune 500 or Fortune 20 company to be able to do, to go work with a startup. And that's actually where most of the Fortune 500 sort of gets this wrong, is how do you actually go do these partnerships? How do you build an ecosystem?
Why did you do it?
Well, for a couple of reasons. One, he had a good product, but we wanted to also change culture. How do you change culture? You start to bring the boxes in, the errands. We had Aaron come in and talk to business leaders, high-level business leaders, people in courses. How does Aaron think? What does he do? And then you have to give him the tools. You have to move things to the cloud. What does that mean? Why do I need to do that? People are fearful. I'm going to give up security. I don't have access. There's a lot of fear that people have to get over.
GE has made a lot of bets on innovative companies. I have to point out that exactly a year ago at this conference, I sat on this stage with a man.
It's not a very good time.
You're going to know.
Story.
Ben Kaufman from Quirky, who I think maybe 3 weeks after that,
declared bankruptcy.
You made a big investment in the company, and they declared bankruptcy. Yeah. What's Quirky doing now?
Well, Quirky doesn't exist anymore, but Ben's, I think Ben will come up with something really great. He's a really great founder and a really great product guy. But for us, that was about taking a risk. It was about it was culture change. It was trying a new space. We were using our consumer businesses, largely lighting and appliances, to say, can we iterate faster? Can we use more open source product development? Can we operate more like a startup? And it worked really well.
Charles, yeah.
But I was going to say, at Appliances, we created something called First Build with some other startups like Local Motors with Quirky, and it's now in a really fast, iterative product.
So you learned from the bad experience.
I'll give you one example of just culture change and how we use that. When we first did the deal with Quirky, we said to the head of technology at Appliances, we're so excited for this, we'll figure out a deal to give you pay your team in Quirky stock. He was smart to say, no, I don't want that. But he said, what I want is, I just want the freedom to do this. And I want to learn from them, and they want to learn from me. And I want the space to do something. So it's just sort of an interesting example.
Yeah, I still think the connected egg tray was a good idea.
Yeah, that one wasn't a good idea.
But I would say that that failure is actually a positive example of how this is actually going to play out. Like you will invest lots of money in things that don't work, and the ability to actually work through that, maybe take some positive experiences or lessons from that, but continue with that. It shouldn't be a deterrent.
Well, Charles Koch was on this stage yesterday and was talking about that. Actually, he said he personally would have, if he were a public company, he would have been fired 5 times, and it's allowing failure inside the company that's enabled them to succeed. But why is that so hard for big companies to get their heads around?
Well, I think in some of that's an alibi. I think it's, if people want to say my investors aren't going to let me create tomorrow, I question that a little bit. I mean, you have to do both. I mean, look at our company. I mean, I'm just, since I've worked there, but Jeff Immelt's done some very uncomfortable and unpopular things. Investing in the digital future is expensive. It's only, now I think investors are starting to understand what it means, and we're starting to come to terms with that. Globalization, these are things that at first you're not sure what they're going to lead to.
I think maybe the two additional things are, one is the cost of failure is so much more public. So if, and you don't necessarily have the same permission as the startups or the disruptors. So if you had a Detroit company have the autopilot failure that Tesla just had, that would basically halt all innovation in one of those car manufacturers for because you'd have lots of people that would be on the firing line of that organization because of how public that would be and all of the risk and all of the cost of the publicity around it, et cetera. So when you have a company that is a disruptor and they don't have the same exact kind of position, they're known for being at the bleeding edge where things will break, that gives them a permission to be able to do far more innovative things. That's the first thing. And then the other is, one thing that we found in the course that we didn't quite realize at first is there's a lot of things in a sort of industrialist or Fortune 500 companies kind of value network or set of partnership relationships that prevent them from being innovative. So for instance, if your suppliers are also behind, then fundamentally you would have to go begin to work with a new set of suppliers, which would then disrupt long-standing relationships that you've had for a very long time. If in the case of like a Ford or a GM, if what you normally do is sell through your dealership network, but the future of self-driving cars or on-demand transportation has nothing to do with dealership networks, then fundamentally you're going to have to disrupt your distribution channel. And for a bunch of obvious reasons, including financial incentives and just how organizations are designed, you have a lot of organizations that don't want to go break their business models and who they're working with.
So, Beth, Aaron put you in the top 5% of industrial companies that have, and maybe that's influenced somewhat by the fact that you're a big customer, but a lot of other people would say the same.
We have other big customers.
It's been very impressive. In conversations with you and in conversations with Jeff Immelt, you both said that one of the reasons you were able to do that was because you lived through our experience, the media experience, the disruption of media, which was the first wave, and you saw what happened to media businesses as Google and Facebook took all the value out of the equation. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I was at NBC about 10 years ago leading the digital effort. And it was, if you go back in the time machine, it was when YouTube exploded and everybody in traditional media, certainly on the broadcast side, in cable, we were going like, oh my gosh, we don't know how to make videos with cats playing pianos. And we were very intimidated and we missed it, right? We didn't understand what was happening. But the argument at the time was, I remember it distinctly like it was yesterday, why am I going to give up analog dollars for digital pennies?
Yep.
That was the argument, as if this was never going to scale, as if it was never going to happen. And I think where companies, the bigger companies, were getting better at this is you got to start to put enough bets, put enough opportunities out there so that the failure is happening faster, you're cycling through, you're learning, you're keeping going. It's not one big thing is it. For us, I could point to 5 things at that time at NBC. One of them worked. Has sort of worked. It's called Hulu. There were 5 others that didn't work. I mean, iVillage and others that ended up going out of business. But you have to have enough of those plays that you're trying to understand and grow your way forward. And you have to believe those pennies become dimes or whatever currency you want to use. And they may never be the full analog dollar. And the challenge is the piece of the pie gets bigger. The pieces are smaller, and you're just layering on more and more services, and it's hard. It's hard when you're used to having all this, and now you got to work harder.
Aaron, I want to open it up to questions in just a minute. I'm sure there are a lot, but what would you say are the 3 big takeaways that you've learned through thinking through this and preparing this course for big companies trying to make the digital transformation?
Yeah, so
other than adopting Box.
Yeah, that was the first lesson that we wanted to make sure was clear to everybody. But I'd say subsequent lessons after that were, so it actually does start with your organization and your culture. So we think it's a technology problem. We think it's a digital problem. And fundamentally, if you have an organization structure that is preventing you because of your business model and because of your partner network and the people you have in your company, that is where you have to start. And so the best examples we could pull from were organizations where you had separate divisions that were building a digital strategy that were fundamentally disruptive to either the core company or the ecosystem of the core company, but they were left to go run wild with that disruption, essentially. The second is So we basically, sort of saw that there are going to be some industrials that just simply won't survive because their sort of relationship with their customer is too disconnected, or there's too many steps in between them and their customer, and there's going to be too many other points where some other disruption will basically invert the marketplace. So if you think about the payment industry and in banking, you have a lot of scenarios where you have like an insurance provider or a credit card processor that doesn't end up touching that end merchant or that end customer. It's going to be very hard for them to survive as you have these ecosystems get squeezed. So it's incredibly important that you make sure you have a strategy that ultimately is interacting with the end customer of your product, as opposed to some other set of distributors that get out to your product. And then you have to change your culture. So you're fundamentally, your organization has to work differently.
And Beth, on culture change, I mean, you've been at this for a decade now.
Ever. Yeah.
What are the top lessons? I'm sure people come to you all the time and say, how the hell do you do this? What are the top lessons that you've learned that you can give to other
Well, I
big
think
companies?
you just have to do it. I mean, it's really that. There has to be a stick-to-itness. I think what often happens in companies, it's like, yeah, we tried that. Oh, yeah, we did that. And okay, you take a little piece of it. We haven't, as much as I love Eric Ries and Lean Startup, we're not like going page by page. There's a few critical things of Lean Startup, minimally viable product. It's totally changed the way we think of a very engineering, process-driven company. What if you just get with your customer and you do a prototype is basically what that means. This idea of everybody says it, fail fast, fail small, you really don't do it. Like, how are you going to hold yourself accountable? Can you start to measure leaders for how many ideas they tested? Can finance start to own that even in new ways? Because it's a much better capital allocation process for them if they can sort of de-risk things earlier and do smaller bets and learn before they scale. So there's a lot of good, but I think often we don't hold people accountable. We don't change our incentives and our metrics, and it's like a cute, fun thing, and it's hard work.
Okay, I'm going to open it up. Raise your hand if you have a question, but before I take the first question, I have to ask you, Aaron, we had Drew Houston on the stage yesterday.
Oh, good.
And Dan Primack.
Yes.
Dan Primack quoted you saying that you had said, if you want to know what Dropbox is going to do next, just look at what we did 3 to 5 years ago. And then Dan said...
That's a good line, yeah.
You like that one.
I do.
You don't deny saying it.
I tweeted it. I didn't say it.
That works.
Your tweets are the
That
best.
works.
I don't know if people
And
follow.
so Dan then said to Drew, what's one thing you've done before Box? And he said, become cash positive.
Yeah, I saw that tweet also. Is that a question or just a statement?
That's a statement for you to respond to.
Oh, got it. Well, I ran into Drew last night. I congratulated him on the great joke. And actually, I think it's probably a positive sign for Silicon Valley that people are now saying my cash flow is better than yours. So like that's probably not the worst thing of all time. But I would note that Blockbuster was probably had better cash flow than Netflix for a couple of years there. So
will someone tweet that out right now, please? Questions? Can we get a paddle right here and a microphone? Yeah. And identify yourself, please.
Mike Quatnitz from Azure Capital. So I have a question. With changing the culture at GE, we found with our startups and companies we're involved with that sometimes you have to change out quite a few people. Yeah. How did that work for you? What portion, at what levels did you have to make people changes as opposed to re-educate?
Yeah, and I think every function is somewhat different about it. I can talk a lot to the sales and marketing folks that I work with. I mean, suddenly in a digital arena, you're talking about selling an outcome, right? I mean, what does that even mean? How do I do that? It's a more consultative sell. So you still need the people who sell things, but the people who can go into the CEO and have a more, how do I help your business run better? Not a lot of those in your company. And so you can try to train. They're often consultants. So in many cases, what's a solution architect, a systems architect? Those are not people that they've grown up on the product side, but not on the commercial side. So you need one or two, often to show the organization what do we mean. Some people might gravitate and be able to change, but often you got to get that balance. We found hiring new people into the company and getting the balance and making it safe for them to be different, that's really hard too. So I would say it's a little bit of both. You can train some people, but more than likely you have to bring in new DNA as part of that process.
Questions? There's one right up here, and there's another one right here, if you guys can start with this.
Hey, Scott Kirsner from the Boston Globe. I'm curious, Beth, what's guiding, in the post-Quirky world, what's guiding the way you guys scout startup companies and the way you interact with startup companies and, the way you want to invest in or have a relationship?
GE has had 2 eras, pre-Quirky and post-Quirky. So.
Exactly. I'm glad we can set that in stone now. And now we're coming into, I thought where you were going to go is the Boston era, where GE's announced they're moving their headquarters to Boston. And that's one of the reasons I think maybe behind your question is us starting to get much more of an appreciation of the partners, that ecosystem word we all use, but understanding it much more. We've done a lot of that in Silicon Valley, in Israel. I think it's now part of our playbook, so that when we start to say, how do we be part of what's happening? It took us to Boston. I could point you in Chicago with our transportation business, our healthcare business, and much more. It's a partnership with a series of VC and startups and incubators, different labs that we create with our customers to connect them. So I think it's taking us to really a model more than it's necessarily taking us to new kinds of startups.
Question right here, yeah.
Hi, I'm Terry Williamson with Koch Industries, and you heard our CEO speak yesterday. We are very big on culture and agree that that's number 1. What's number 2?
You go first.
No, you go. I need time.
I mean, I'd say accountability and getting it done. I mean, I think that's the same thing. Maybe, the culture, I guess I'd say part of our culture is we wake up every day and we want to be better. But you have to deliver. I mean, we're a big culture about delivering things. And so you can all have a great culture, but if you're not holding yourself accountable, I'm not sure it's really as good as you want it to be.
Can I just endorse that point?
Yeah.
But can I ask just a point of clarification on that? So to hold people accountable, I mean, does someone have to be accountable for the Quirky investment?
Yeah.
I mean, and what are the ramifications
Let me
of
tell
that?
you on that one. I can give you a good example. So I had some heated discussions with our finance team, as you might imagine. It was an impairment for, but again, it's in the broad scheme of GE, we're doing things with ventures. We assume there will be some things that don't make it. And that's what you put into your model. So it wasn't a surprise. No one ever likes it. But I have to say, Jeff Immelt said to me, we have to try things.
Yeah.
Let's go back and count. What are the good things? What did we learn? What are we not going to do again? And we've had much bigger misses as a company than that. So you have to put it in perspective.
Yeah. There was a question right here.
Yeah. Hi, Rob Tarkov, Lithium Technologies. Beth, I have a question for you. How do you deal with the fact that the incentive structures are so different for disruptive companies than they are for mainstream? So in the Silicon Valley, it's easy to get an employee to try to risk something because their primary economic driver is equity compensation. I imagine in GE, for most of the people that you're trying to get to do this, it's a bonus, and it's tied to a set of financial metrics. So you did say you changed the incentive system. So I just want to ask you to go a little deeper. How do you change them, and how does that get reflected in day-to-day projects?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, and we haven't figured it all out. So I'll tell you a few things, but time will tell if they're going to work out. One, we changed the incentive compensation for all the people in GE who get incentive compensation, and it's much more aligned around a long-term and some cash and margin, but there's a long-term factor in that as well. That was a big deal. And then what we've been doing is, depending on the function or the impact, so we brought a lot of software folks in, a lot of competition in the software arena, in the digital, artificial intelligence. We had to come up with a different incentive plan for folks who are working in that area. I'll give you one I've been working on very closely. We sort of recast our lighting business into something called Current, which is an energy efficiency, renewable energy on-site business. And we're paying those guys in much different milestones to speed, milestones to growth, putting together really a cap table, if you will, thinking like it's a startup, and incenting people. You got to get to yourself. This has been really hard, and I have to say HR has been a great partner in this, but you have to ask, if this team can create $1 billion of new value we didn't have, why isn't it worth paying them a percent that otherwise you're not going to have to pay anyway? So it's that kind of thinking. And the last thing I'd say is just, I think sometimes beware. and this is a big watch out I didn't expect. Some of the people want both. They want the security of the company and they want the upside. And I go, I do too. But so it's a real good test of the people, the Aarons of the world. There are some who actually can thrive in our companies. How much are you willing to risk? Would you put your own money in that? And I think you then start to know who maybe can go the distance on that.
Aaron, last comment.
Yeah, well, I'd want at least 2%. So,
Yeah.
but no, I mean, to me, the exciting thing is that, so, you know, I think if you think about the past, 10, 20, 30 years of technology innovation, it's tended to be very isolated within the tech industry, where, I mean, probably half of this room, if you're in a tech company, is probably going after some kind of regulated industry that previously never had software before. So we're, quite literally at the center of a massive, industrial revolution, and I think that I think the stat is like 89% of the Fortune 500 has changed over in the past, 50 years or something like that. So it's very clear that the next, decade or so will be defining for which industrials survive and which ones don't, and certainly we believe the ones that use Box will. So that's what we're betting on.